Hello everybody, my name is Bill. This is SixRounds Studio and we're back working on the Ryzen M50. We're going to start fixing these cracks today. But before we do that, my last 3, 4, 5 videos, I've had some really good engagement from all of you. And I've had some really great comments from you guys that actually I've learned from. So there are some things that in the future, some of those suggestions that you've made, I want to think about learning how to do those so that I might apply them to my own repairs. But one of the important questions that was asked, and I want to talk about that a little bit in today's video, was if the gun stock cracked, do you know what caused the crack to occur? And if you know what caused the crack to occur, what are you doing to prevent that crack from occurring in the future? That is actually an excellent approach when it comes to doing any of this kind of work. And I've talked about that in videos in the past, and I'll continue to talk about that in videos going forward. We're not going to do the 1907 today, but there's reasons that that gun stock cracked, and I want to talk about that when we get to repairing the cracks on that gun stock. This Ryzen, I don't know. I don't know enough about them. I don't know what caused this gun to crack. I have my theories, and I mentioned that in the last video that I think the recoil pocket is too small and it doesn't transfer the recoil back as well as it should, or control that recoil back. That's my theory. I don't know that. Again, I have so little experience. I have virtually no experience with this. But just based on my prior experience, based on the things that I've learned over the last 40 years, I'm thinking that this is a recoil problem. Will it crack again? Well, when I give this back to the owner, because I don't have a class 3, I don't have the gun here, all I can do is speculate what's causing this. The owner asked me about doing an epoxy bedding, a full acroglass bedding, and I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure that that is a great approach. What I do know is that when we've finished this repair, when we finish this epoxy repair, the epoxy repair is not going to come apart. And this is another problem that I've had with viewers in the past who accuse me of not doing real repairs. And there's no basis for that. Epoxy or even glue finishes are stronger when completed than the surrounding wood itself. So if this was going to split again, it wouldn't be the epoxy repair splitting. The split would come to wood next to the epoxy repair. So the commenter who asked, what do you do to prevent that from occurring again? Have you gone back and tried to understand the cause? That's why that's such an important question, because the epoxy is not going to split. The epoxy repair is going to be as strong or stronger than the surrounding wood. So the question then becomes, what caused this to split in the first place? And the owner of this is going to have to do some analysis on this to try and understand that. So the epoxy is not the problem. The epoxy repair is not a problem. I was asked, am I going to screw this? Am I going to put butterfly joints to keep this from coming apart? If this was a tabletop where there's a lot of lateral pressures, I might do that. All the impacts are all coming in the rearward direction against that recoil pocket. So we need to find out, or the owner has to find out, is there interference? Is there metal that's interfering? Is there metal that is perhaps wedging against the radiuses that's causing it to split? That's the analysis, and those are the analyses that I would do if I had the entire gun here. Again, I don't have it here. So we are going to epoxy this today, and the epoxy is not going to come apart. It's not going to separate. There's no reason for me to put screws or pins or any of that in this. for this repair. Now, when the owner gets it back, he's going to want to take a look at this and try to understand where the interference is, what's causing this to happen. There are a couple other possibilities, and wood is hygroscopic. In other words, it takes on and gives off moisture all year long. So if you're in a very dry climate and you run this into a very humid climate, the wood is going to take on moisture and it's going to swell. It's going to get bigger. It just is. The same is true if you live in a very humid climate and you bring this gun into a dry climate, like say the deserts of Arizona. Well, it's going to acclimate to the relative humidity of the area that it's in, and it will begin to shrink, and it'll begin to pull itself inward. As those cells give off the moisture, the wood cell, it's going to shrink in on itself. For instance, if the wood to metal fit was very snug in the humid conditions, and then you move this into a dry condition, and that wood begins to shrink it in on itself, it could possibly split just like this did. So there's a lot of things to consider. When we get to this 1907 forearm, there are some reasons that this split, and I'm pretty sure at this point I understand them, just again based on years of dealing with this kind of problem. But sort of understanding that and analyzing the causes of those splits, those cracks, those breaks, what might have led up to it? What might have been the cause? What might have been the failure point between the metal and the wood that would have caused this to split? Sometimes, I'm going to tell you guys, this stuff, this is so thin, all right, there's virtually no material here. I'm going to guess that this is 100 thousandths. Let's measure it. That's 270 thousandths thick at the recoil. Just on the side panels themselves. On the other side, it's 350 thousandths. There's virtually no material. 150, 140 there. Come down in here, it's 300. That is not a lot of material that is going to absorb this recoil. And you got that impact just going constantly. You've got that constant impact, or that constant cleaving of the impacts against that wood. So those are all the things that you need to think about. You need to analyze, you need to understand, so that you've tried to arrest or stop the cause of that split or that damage. Now, most gun stocks do not split. We'll talk more about other causes when we get into the next split repair. When we get into this 1907, I have a pretty strong theory as to why that's split. And we'll talk about that as well in the next episode where we do those repairs. Let's get started epoxying this gun stock and making it whole again. So we're going to mix up some epoxy, and we're going to do a couple things to it. One of the first things we're going to do is add a little bit of denatured alcohol into the mix, so that we can thin this down. And the reason we're doing that is we're going to have to force this down inside those cracks. We don't want it too thin, but we want it thin enough that it will flow. Then we're going to add just a touch, a small touch of white pigments. And the reason for that is when the uncolored epoxy dries, it dries black. Leaves a black line. And because the human eye focuses in on sharp lines, we're going to try and soften that look using the white pigments, because we're going to have to go in and add some color to this. And it's easier to color over white than it is to color over black or dark brown or any kind of a dark color. And we're going to use our spatula and try to force the epoxy down inside that crack. And we're going to try to use hydraulic, if you will, pressure to force that down in. This is where one of your suggestions came in about how to use that hydraulic pressure by drilling a small hole in the end grain and then making a small wooden plug and then using that plug to force that epoxy down into all of the cracks. I think that's a marvelous idea and one I'm going to experiment with, but not today. All right, before I pull that out and do it in there, I'm going to roll this over. Now the only place that I am going to glue up right this very minute is this back one. All right, let's pull this out. And we'll use the wedge to push that. Back to using the denatured alcohol. We want to get all that excess off the finish. Let's see how this plays. All right, we're going to let that dry 24 hours, and then we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start gluing up these bigger cracks in the bottom here. So as you can see, it is definitely forcing its way out the bottom. I'm going to put a clamp on the bottom, but I have to be careful that when I squeeze, I'm only squeezing this area here, and I'm not squeezing in on the top, because if I fold this in, it'll actually, believe it or not, it'll open the crack on the bottom. So I have to start out by just doing a simple wedge so that this won't squeeze in. Let me get rid of this one. And then also, I want to see if I can't come up with a way to do this one as well. Prevent that from squeezing this top in. All right. And the same thing, we're going to continue to force that down in that crack. So based on how that flowed down and out of the bottom, I'm pretty confident I've managed to get that epoxy all the way through the entire thickness of the clamp, or the thickness of the wood. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try and force the clamps just on the bottom section. There we go. When we come back for the next video, I'll be pulling these clamps and we'll be taking a look at the repairs. This video is beginning to get a little bit long, so I'd like to cut it right here. This is a little bit different video for me, talking my way through these problems and kind of sharing that with all of you. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this style, let me know, and I'll definitely try to get better at it. This was a little bit out of my comfort zone, so please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We are definitely trying to grow this channel as big as the algorithm will allow it. Got a lot of fun stuff coming, and I would love it if you guys came back to see it all. Guys, I love you, and I will see you in the next video coming up doing something. I got 3 projects I'm working on in the shop, and I don't know which one's going to be next. I have to blend these projects based on things like epoxy dry times. Guys, I'll see you in the next video.